Okay, good morning. I'd like to start by introducing the first speaker this morning. Dr. Monica Baskin is a professor in the Division of Preventive Medicine in the Department of Medicine. She's also vice chair for culture and diversity in the Department of Medicine, and she has a leadership role in the Comprehensive Cancer Center and its diversity programs as well. Her background is has a doctoral degree in counseling psychology and made a transition into research during a postdoctoral training, and has been for a long time now on the faculty at UAB with a special interest in the relationship between obesity and cancer, and trying to develop approaches to help people deal with their own health problems through modifying their behaviors. She's really an expert on participatory, community-based participatory research, and has done a lot to build community between university and research subjects, and is going to talk about that general topic today.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be here to talk with you guys. We were having a quick sidebar here where the question was posed about how did I get into research, and it was quite by happenstance. I was trained, my doctorate is in counseling psychology, and then I was doing a postdoc in clinical psychology at Emory School of Medicine, and my postdoctoral training director encouraged all of us to go and talk to people who were doing the things that we thought we might want to do. So she said, call them up, have coffee, have conversations, basically ask them, what do you wish you knew then that you now know? And just, again, by happenstance, one of the people on my list, I actually did not know his name at the time, but I knew his wife, who had been in my cohort in graduate school, and she talked a lot about this person doing, her husband doing community-based research in Black churches around minority health, and she said, oh, you should meet him at some point. So I reached out to him, and the short of it is I went in, had a brief conversation with him. He had asked me to bring my CV, and I walked out with a job offer. So he basically said, the best way for you to learn how to do this is to come work for me. He said, I just got an R01 funded around childhood obesity in Black churches, and I'm looking for someone with your talents. And so I finished up, negotiated to get out of my clinical postdoc a little bit early, went on to get my license, and then the rest is history. And that person actually was Ken Resnicow, for those of you who might know some of his work in cancer prevention. He's currently at University of Michigan. So with that being said, that's who I am and how I got here. But what I want to spend our time, brief time this morning, talking about what I have learned in terms of how you work with diverse populations and how you can really use that information to inform your science and get better outcomes. So just going to try to hit 4 things in our conversation. So I want to talk about, what is this community engaged research? What does it look like? I want to talk about why I think it's important to research, and then give an example of a couple of tools, or at least one tool that I have used and found to be very successful when going out into communities, particularly those in which you don't have a lot of experience with. And then lastly, talk about some of the challenges as well as the opportunities that I see when it comes to community engaged research. So generally speaking, traditional ways that we all learn to do research are what I would call, and others might call, the parachute model. So you basically just parachute in, you're here today, you're gone tomorrow, not really thinking a lot about, what the interests are or the needs are for the individuals, your participants, the communities they live in. There may be actually no benefit at all, or it may be quite limited, especially when we're talking about some of our observational studies and so forth. There may not be a particular benefit. And then there may actually be a high potential for harm and distrust. So depending on who came before you or what the experiences have been like for those potential participants in that community, you may actually be contributing to more distrust in that relationship. And if you're doing interventions, which a large part of my work is intervention work, if you're not really thinking about what to do after that RCT is over, how you're going to sustain that program or that intervention if it's successful. So generally, we're taught to have your treatment group, your control group. You come in, you control every condition you possibly can. You are not flexible. You just kind of come in, you have your protocol, you stick to it, and so forth. And I would argue that there's some that rigidity may actually be a little bit more challenging when you go into communities that are potentially ones that you've never worked in before and maybe a little bit have greater diversity. So these are, some of the things that I think that are results of sort of that traditional thinking. Sometimes you have programs that are not really tailored for your audience. It's one size fits all. And then when you have issues around adherence, it may be because whatever you're doing doesn't fit that population. It may not be relevant in a number of ways. It may not be culturally relevant. And that culture meaning very broadly, it may not be specifically for that group of people, or it may not be for, around gender issues, around other kinds of issues. It may just not be relevant for that population. The other outcomes, negative outcomes, I think, because they may not, these traditional interventions or traditional research programs don't have a lot of input from the community. So they may not be willing to buy in. You may have challenges or difficulty with your recruitment and retention if you're not, in fact, getting the input of the community or potential participants. And most of these kind of research methodologies are really exclusively focused on individual behavior change. And we all know that individuals are nested within families, within communities, within a larger society. And so even when people know the right thing to do, it may be really difficult to get the outcomes you're looking for because of these other things that they are connected, individuals are connected to. So in comparison to sort of the traditional models of research, most of this conversation is about, well, what's different about community engaged research? And so for me, what I would say is that it's, as it seems, community engagement means engaging the community in the research program, and there are different levels of engagement. So I kind of liken it to, a plant versus a single tree versus a forest of trees. So at the very basic level of community engagement, you want your stakeholders, which are a variety of individuals. They may be actual participants. They may be, if you're doing health services research, they may be people within the healthcare system. They may be local leaders. They may be folks in government and so forth. But you want those stakeholders to provide input and assistance in your recruitment. So that's at the basic level. Many of us do that. We say, oh, well, we're going to hire somebody in the community, give me the, help with the recruitment. Or we have here at UAB recruitment and retention facilities, shared facilities where we might have people that are from the community to kind of help with that or pass out flyers and so forth. The next level down then is when your stakeholders provide input into your research question, the study design, and they may be active team members within that research. So you're doing more than just asking them to help you with your recruitment and retention. You're asking them to help you formulate your questions, helping you to formulate what the study design looks like, and they may actually be a part of a research team. And then the deeper level, which, one type of that is community-based participatory research. And that's when stakeholders work with their academic partners and adhere to all components of the research. So that is from coming up with the question, writing the application, sharing your finances and budgeting, being active members, data collection, as well as data analysis and potentially dissemination of that work. So every place that you would normally see an academic researcher, you would also see one of these stakeholders. And that is what community-based participatory research, or CBPR, really is all about. So this is a definition that the Kellogg Community Scholars Program came up with in 2001, and it really focuses on a couple of key things. I'll clue you into the definition. So it's a collaborative approach. So it is not the traditional hierarchy where the academics sort of control everything. It really is a process where there's collaboration, there's give and take, and there's an appreciation for all members who are at the table. It also is, the definition includes the word, equitable, research that equitably involves all partners. So this one is really tough, even for folks like myself who've done CBPR for a while. There's some inherent inequities in terms of how funding is passed down from federal agencies to universities and so forth, but to the extent possible, having equitable relationships there in every component of that work. And then it also recognizes unique strengths that each party brings to the table. So it's not that the academics in the room are the only ones that are really smart and bring something to the table. It's an appreciation that the stakeholders, the community members also are really smart and they bring something to the table. So I think those are the main components of CBPR that I think are really worth thinking about when we're talking about working with particularly communities that may include a lot of diversity and or the communities that you've not worked in before. So Barbara Israel and colleagues identified 9 principles of CBPR. And first and foremost, they identify that it's important to recognize the community as the unit of identity, as opposed to the individual. So when you're going in and doing this community engaged research, you want to be thinking about sort of the community perspective. So even if your outcomes are individually based, again, how is that individual nested within all of these different systems, including the community? The second principle is about, again, part of the definition I mentioned before, building on community strengths and resources. So oftentimes we go in, particularly in public health or preventive medicine kind of research, we go in and we point out all the things that are wrong. Why is it that this person can't be compliant with my prescription? It's because they don't have, grocery stores. They don't have safe places to be physically active. They don't have. We really go in oftentimes talking about a deficit model, but we all know individuals across this country where they're in circumstances that many of us would see, wow, there's not a lot here. But we know people that do wonderfully, that are not, and they're sort of atypical to what we would think would come out of the communities with the deficits, if you will. And so what CBPR does is start with the strengths. What are the assets? What are the things that, in spite of all the other things, people are able to be successful, people are able to be healthy, people are able to, go on and have a high level of education and be gainfully employed and have families and so forth. The third principle is about facilitating collaborative, equitable partnerships, again, in all phases of the research. So not just coming in once you've got the grant already written and you need a letter of support from the community. It's thinking about that well before you start writing the first thing, right? Well before you start your specific aims page, it's having those conversations. And the fourth principle is about co-learning and capacity building among all partners involved. So it's not just for academics to kind of educate people in the community, it's for the academic types also to sit back and learn from community members. So who's best and the most knowledgeable about a community is people who live and work and play in those communities. So having that ability to learn from one another and build a capacity on both ends. The fifth principle is about integrating and creating a balance between knowledge generation and action for mutual benefits of all partners. And so this is where I think sometimes there's also a lot of tension between academic community partnerships. So if you are in academia, which we all sit in now, you know that it is really important to publish and get funding for your extramural research. All of those things are driving individuals forward, and depending on where you are in your career, sometimes more than others. That's really, really important. And certainly, I would never say that you should not get your publications and write great grants and come up with the next discovery. But it's also important to realize that communities are coming to the table as well. And so your fabulous publication in JAMA and Nature is not really going to mean a whole lot to that individual or that community. So what are the things that you can identify that will be mutually beneficial to both parties, and make sure that those are all things that are thought of up front and that you follow through with them. The sixth principle is about emphasis on local relevance of public health problems and ecological approaches that address multiple determinants of health and disease. So, we have national numbers, and sometimes we go in thinking about, well, how can we address this problem? Making sure that you also understand either how that problem is or identify other things that have local relevance that you can add into your research to make sure that, again, the local needs are being met. And addressing multiple determinants of health, I think, is really important. There's been a lot of attention, many seminars that you may have heard of even here on this campus to talk about. It's not just the individual. These social determinants really have a major role in a person's health. So things outside of just their physical health have influence. And so it's important to look at that. The seventh principle involves systems development through a cyclical and iterative process. And basically all this means is, getting out of the traditional comfort zone of once you have a protocol locked in place, and even if you learn new information, you cannot change it. So you will be getting new information as you go and need to sort of process that and figure out if there's a need to make any adjustments into the way you're delivering and moving things around. And CVPR principles, talk about allowing for that and being okay with some of that flexibility. The eighth one is about disseminating findings to all partners and involving all partners in that process. So again, your dissemination doesn't stop at your professional organizational presentations or your peer-reviewed publications. It's important to disseminate back to the community, the participants in the larger community, and to other stakeholders that may be interested in the information. And again, including members, those stakeholder groups, the members of the community in the interpretation of your data. Sometimes there may be some other interpretation that you might be missing. So it's important for you to have their voices there. And lastly, but certainly not least, it's that CVPR is actually a long-term process and commitment. It's not the here today, gone tomorrow. It is even long after the funding is gone. These are communities that you have committed to and will likely stay connected with you for a while. So I have actually been at UAB now, this is my 16th year, and there's still partners that I had in some of my research and work in Atlanta that, still from time to time might reach out. So it is a long-term commitment that you have when you start this process. So I now have a question for you. Everybody knows the game of Jeopardy, sort of moving to why some of this community engagement might be relevant. So the answer really is 17 years. So who knows the question? The audience participation.
How long does it take a research to reach the community?
Absolutely, you went ahead into your answer. So yes, the answer is that the answer, which is the question, is what is the time lag in translational research? And so it really takes about 17 years from the time you start your basic or even your clinical research to going through with all the testing, phase 1, 2, whatever, and getting to the point where it's actually to the level where it's out there and it's being disseminated. That's an awful long time. So as the parent of a teenager, yeah, it seems to go by fast, but it is a very long time to get to 17 years. And one of the things that I would argue is that community engaged research can help to cut down on that time lag. So the main things I think in community engaged research can actually help you develop interventions that are more relevant, they can be more successful, and they're easier to scale up. So even when you find that, evidence-based program, part of what happens in that lag is that they're not achievable out in the real world. We've sort of developed them under very constrained circumstances but we haven't really thought about what it will take to actually disseminate them and scale them up if they work. So community engaged research, forces researchers and providers, again, to address and listen to the community needs and concerns. It'll combine the wealth of knowledge that I think both happens at the academic level, but also in the community level. Can also improve your research, so help you figure out, who you need to recruit, how you recruit, how you design interventions so that real people will actually show up and be compliant with them, and so forth. And it can help to bridge some of those cultural gaps. So as people think about the misnomers they may have about certain types of treatment, the myths and so forth that are out there, by having this kind of research, community engaged research, you can understand where those challenges might be and go ahead and answer them and address them so that they don't become problematic in your research. It also can help to build trust between communities, researchers, and providers if you're in clinical settings. It's very impactful for people to come into communities and have the conversations without asking for things initially and just hear people out. It can be very powerful to establishing trust, but also to reestablishing trust, as I mentioned before. Sometimes it's not what you might be doing as an individual investigator, but it might be what your colleague might have done, a year ago or 5 years ago that may be problematic for your actual work. It can also provide needed resources for the community. So a lot of times in the research that I have done, these larger trials where we purchase a lot of things that we use for the intervention, and we try to be thoughtful about what things can we leave behind once that project is over. And so thinking about that and being creative in your design and can also be helpful for the community. And then lastly, I would say it also helps to set the stage for increasing diversity of students entering into the field. So, many of the educational and training experiences that we try to foster here at UAB are about increasing the diversity in that pipeline from, we have programs here that sort of really target middle school students, high school students, getting them into college, helping them understand about research, and then obviously with junior investigators and so on and so forth. But having researchers go out into the community, have conversations, have them see what it looks like, have their family members actually participate. We often hire people in communities actually as UAB employees to do components of the research. So that can also intrigue other younger folks to get involved in this as well. So if I've convinced even one or two of you about, this may be something you want to do, I just want to give you a little bit of sense of how you might get started. And it doesn't have to be as daunting as it might seem in terms of going to these communities. So here's one tool that has been very successful, I think, in having initial conversations to figure out what the story is, what the research question might be, or what the study design is. And it is called PhotoVoice. So anyone heard of PhotoVoice before? So maybe a couple of people in the room. So we've all probably heard the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so with PhotoVoice, it's a technique or tool that I think helps to really give the researcher a better sense of the local context. So it was developed or at least coined, the term was coined by Dr. Wang in 1997, and it was based on a theory basically that individuals should analyze the problems that they often see within their lives and then be able to have a conversation or dialogue about these issues. So again, coming from this, the strength of the community as being the best place to sort of identify and analyze the problems. It's a participatory action research methodology where participants express their quote unquote lived experience by combining photographs and stories. Hence the photo and the voice component. It also asserts that people are the best experts regarding their own lives. So the goals of PhotoVoice are pretty simple. So the PhotoVoice wants to add a tangible or visual element to participatory process, and it can assist in engaging communities in planning both in terms of research, but also in policy issues, and also providing a way to evaluate the outcomes of an intervention. So the three main goals, one, are to enable people to record and reflect their community's strengths and concerns. The second goal is to promote critical dialogue and knowledge about personal and community issues through large and small group discussions of the photographs. And third, it can provide a visual representation of community experiences and problems, thereby engaging policymakers and other folks who might want to be engaged in some of the action activities that may come of this. So there are a couple of steps here in the Photo Voice process. So the first step is basically just an information session. You bring together the folks that your stakeholders, you describe kind of what is Photo Voice in fairly simplistic terms, just as I was just mentioning. You talk about what some of the themes might be for the photos you're particularly looking for, and then you give some instructions about responsibility. So we're in communities. We don't want to contribute to, any more vulnerability among communities. So we talk to folks about, getting permission before you take pictures of individuals, particularly if they can be identified. We talk about, just personal safety. Don't go into places that where you don't feel comfortable or that are not publicly accessible or you haven't gotten permission, things of that nature. We also train them about how to use the camera so that we can get good quality photos as well. So, and then we talk about the photography as well. Again, the angles, what we're looking for and so forth. So very simplistic kind of a talk or a training with the first informational session. And then the next step is just going out and getting the pictures. So participants are given a specific topic to focus their picture taking on. They're given instructions about the types of situations or categories that they should capture. And they're given some kind of log to go along with their photos that they can bring with their group discussion. So they can kind of remember or jot down kind of where they were or what they were taking a picture of. So fairly simple, just a camera. Typically in the past, a while back, we gave disposable cameras. They're really hard to find now. So we now have just some very low cost digital cameras that we'll hand people, give them for a period of time. Typically, we have them do it for about a week or 10 days to take these pictures. And it's a very simple topic area. After they're finished taking their pictures, they turn back the cameras in. We process and organize those. We, if it was the olden days, we process the photos. The digital ones now, we just upload them and organize them and put them, label them. We select potential photos that we're going to use in the second part of it. So we get, say if we've had 15 people to do that, we may pick some out that we either feel like are really illustrative of the question, or we as investigators have question marks about them. And then we set up a focus group meeting. That's when we're going to bring people back together to tell their stories. So in this step 4, this is where you have the voice component. This is the focus group where you have the reflection and you talk about the photos, distribute the photos for review. They review them individually. We then ask them to rate them. So they have little stickies, they kind of rate them, they pick their top ones and so forth. And then we have the group as a larger to kind of rank some of those pictures. We identify, again, the sample of photos for discussion, and then we start, in a PowerPoint kind of presentation like here, we systematically go through each of those selected pictures, and we go through a methodology called the SHOWED methodology, where we ask these questions for each of the pictures here. And this is part of our qualitative data analysis, where this is the additional data collection that comes along with the picture. So we ask people, what do you see here? So it's not that it's asking people where you see, a white background and some black lettering. We ask people to see it. So everyone has a different lens by which they may see the exact same picture. And so we're not trying to get individuals to be, homogeneous in what they're saying or have agreement. we do want to gather, just in most qualitative research, we want to get all the different possibilities of what people see. Sometimes they pick out something very small and minor, something in the background, perhaps, and sometimes they pick something that's really, pretty prominent. Secondly, we ask, what is really happening here? So it goes beyond sort of what you see statically in the picture, but we have people to start interpreting kind of what they think is happening in the photo there as well. And then we ask them, how does this relate to our lives? So our being the community. Sometimes in my obesity research, we changed the O to be something related to obesity, but really having them to talk, again, do further analysis and reflection on what might it be doing and how does it relate to the individual and the community itself. And then we ask, why does this problem, condition, or strength exist? So we sort of, again, ask them to delve further than the physical picture that they see in front of them. Why is that problematic area there that you took a picture of? Why do you think that, there's something really great in your community, and so forth? The next question is, what can you do to educate others about the problem, condition, or the strength? And then finally, what can we collectively in this collaborative process do about whatever this issue or topic area that we're talking about it. So the show method helps to bring a little bit more in terms of the data collection, the more traditional way to have a protocol for which you are analyzing this information, which then again helps you with kind of getting this written up for publication and so forth. So the final step of a photo voice, if you're trying to hit those 3 goals of photo voice, is some type of community action planning. So the way I've done this, and my colleagues will do this early on in the development of a research program, or maybe the first things we're doing in that formative part to sort of figure out what we're going to do or how we might modify something if we could have come up with a strategy. So there's the training, the research, and the documentation and the discussion that happens in the photo voice component. And then there's the action and advocacy to affect policy, if that may be relevant. It may be understanding the community needs and assets if we're trying to, again, tailor our intervention and evidence-based practice. Or it could be something about getting individuals motivated and engaged to be, much more active and involved in the program. So like any methodology, there are certainly some advantages and some disadvantages. So these are some of the advantages that I've certainly identified in the work. So it can be certainly adapted to be very specific around your goals, your needs assessment, asset mapping, evaluation. It can work in any community. Again, it's really easy to sort of have a picture to kind of tell a story. And particularly it can help with literacy issues. So sometimes we go out, we want to do all these extensive surveys and ask people lots of information. It may be difficult for individuals for a variety of reasons, while they may not be able to really understand and comprehend what you're talking about. But really putting a camera in someone's hand and saying point and click, that's pretty easy for people to do. And we give them very simple things to take pictures of. So that tends to be very easy for the audience. It also allows detailed information to be collected from individual participants. So again, it doesn't seem like a whole lot, but when we give cameras to 15 people and tell them to take up to 20 pictures each, that's a lot of information. And then we go through and we ask these different questions of them. We have literally pages and pages of qualitative notes that we analyze later on. It can be used in the media for policy making, for other ways. You can take these pictures, you can use them. They're very powerful to engage and motivate people. And usually people can take at least one good picture out of that roll. Some of the disadvantages, cost of photography and equipment, particularly as we move to the more the digital cameras. We've lost one or two, but not a lot. That can be costly. Sometimes they don't come back in the same shape that we gave them to them, or they get misplaced and never to be found. If you're using actual film, sometimes the film quality may not be as great if you're using the disposable cameras. And though the photo voice process can be empowering, the community actually must trust the process. Must be open up and be a little bit more vulnerable to sort of talk about the things that are really great and the things that really need some help. Participant diversity in experiences and comfort with cameras can also be a little bit challenging. So again, it's not very difficult, but there still are people, some of the older populations we've worked in, still, particularly when we went to digital cameras, they were a little hesitant about utilizing them and so forth. And depending on what concept you're trying to take a picture of, it may be a little bit challenging because sometimes it's pretty abstract. So that may be, it takes a lot of staff time, and then coordination of participants in photo processing and getting them back and so forth. So just wanted to take a little bit of time to show you kind of what this looked like in one of my research studies. And this was an R1 study where we were focusing on weight management among cancer survivors and family members in the Black Belt of Alabama. And so we really wanted to explore, you know, how this might work. But we knew we had an evidence-based program and wanted to kind of see what were some other things that we could do to support healthy weight loss and healthy weight in this community, because we knew that, yeah, we had the individual level intervention, but we understood that there were things in the community that may get in the way of the success of our clients and participants. So we asked our participants to take pictures for 1 week of things in their community that either helped or hindered or got in the way of healthy lifestyles. And then afterwards, they participated in a focus group to view and discuss the photos. So these were some of the things that, some of the pictures that people said were supportive of a healthy lifestyle. So this person took a picture and they sort of captioned it as someone working in a garden. And then when we asked more in the focus group, someone said, well, this is good exercise. You know, there are fresh vegetables available. You don't have to worry about chemicals in your vegetables when you purchase them at the grocery store. Another person took a picture in their freezer and said, this is frozen okra and peas and greens from a garden. Freezing helps you prepare for times when you don't have access to fresh vegetables. You can have access all year round. Eat more of them instead of the processed ones or things that are canned or and come in other varieties. Another set of pictures, so someone took a really lovely picture of a church in their community and said that this is a place of worship and fellowship, but it's also a place where people were getting physical activity. So they were walking around in the parking lot, and it was a place that people felt secure and safe in terms of going to be physically active. Another person took a picture also within a church. This was sort of fruit and sweet potatoes, and they said healthy eating is being promoted in their church and more churches should promote healthy eating. Other things that people took pictures of, one took a picture of a children's playground. If you're able to exercise, you'll lose weight. This is in our community for recreation and to get more exercise. Here's a community volleyball court. You can get plenty of exercise playing volleyball, and it's a public court. We should use it as often as we can. So again, starting with thinking about our intervention, starting with all the strengths in these rural communities within the Black Belt that you typically wouldn't think of having these wonderful assets, but we wanted to start there to think about how we could build on it. But we also asked, well, what are some things that might be a little bit more challenging in terms of maintaining a healthy lifestyle? So someone took a picture of this saying, you know, walking trail that needs repair. This needs to be fixed. Someone could get hurt. Every person could not walk on that there. An old swimming pool, swimming is a good exercise, but the swimming pool is old. You have to go out of town if you want to swim in a nice pool. Other things, people talked about bad roads or bad road, big trucks is an accident waiting to happen. Both vehicles are trying to not to hit the hole at the same time. There's a pothole in the area. So they talk about that. And in many of these rural communities, when we talk about, oh, get out and be physically active, well, people are living, you know, literally on state highways where the speed limits are pretty high and these trucks are coming through. So that's not really, if we're encouraging them to go walk around your neighborhood, that's really not a safe option. This person took a picture, a bridge over the interstate. This is the only bridge to and from the community. The community has grown. It's not as safe as it used to be. It's so narrow. And so people talk about you know, how do you get across to the other kinds of areas in the community, and it's not really safe. There's not a space to walk along there or to get across those lanes. Other things they talked about were, you know, vacant buildings, it could be a hangout spot for selling drugs or other things that may make it less safe for people not to feel trusting to kind of walk there. And then they also talked about the other environment, the marketing environment. So, you know, an advertisement for fast food and eating fried food and unhealthy foods can cause weight gain, but advertisements make you aware of these delicious foods and really make it you know, enticing. Who wouldn't want to be a hero by going to buy Jack's Chicken? So those things really were helpful for us, and I think it can be helpful for you if you're doing this kind of work in these more diverse populations you also haven't worked in, to get a sense of what you're working with. So for our team, you know, it helped us to better understand the structural barriers to achieving and maintaining healthy weight in rural communities. That was really important. We were coming in with a program that we knew should, in fact, help people to lose weight and maintain a healthy weight, but we couldn't do that in a vacuum without knowing what else was happening around them. We also knew that there were key assets to supporting those healthier lifestyles. So the community gardens, the churches as a place for not only for worship and fellowship and to promote healthy messages, but a physical location for people to be physically active. And then it helped us, you know, in our future intervention development to target environments that were likely to may get in the way. So to kind of give people places to walk and facilities to go to that didn't have the disrepair. But it also helped us to kind of motivate individuals. So other actions, so at the policy level, for those streets that were with potholes, or for the community recreational facilities that had not been maintained, to have these series of pictures to then walk into their lawmakers' offices to say, hey, this is my community, what are you doing about it? So we were able to kind of, again, have that mutual benefit by going through this process. So because I also was asked to touch just a little bit around cultural competence, I'll also just say, you know, the question is, what is culturally relevant? And that's where another place where I think the community engagement work can help you to figure that out. So whether or not for us, when we were doing some of this, the weight loss or weight management interventions, whether or not it meant that we needed to have people in front of them delivering the messages that looked like them. So we were targeting African-American men and women with breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer, or whether or not we needed to have the intervention run through churches, like some of the work I did early on in my career in Atlanta, or whether or not we needed to reach particular men in barbershops, which is where a lot of health promotion actually goes on in African-American barbershops, whether or not we needed to focus on physical activities like Zumba or more traditional kinds of activities, whether or not our marketing materials needed to have certain faces and what they needed to look like. So for example, for the DSM Cares project, we were aiming at people who were cancer survivors, so they tended to be older. So we got ideas about what the pictures needed to look like. So they needed to be not a very younger looking people, they needed to be people that kind of matched our audience and so forth. So culturally relevant for me is, it's hard to determine what that is until you know the community that you're working with. And that's gonna differ. So no group is the same. So just because you've been in one group of, LGBT, community of LGBTQ community, that doesn't mean that the next one that you go to in a different community is going to be exactly the same or have the same needs. So it's important for you, I think, to do some of this community engagement at some level to get the answer to what is, in fact, culturally relevant. And then when it is time to do some cultural adaptation, you have to actually have the flexibility to do that. So for us, we recognized that the Southern dietary pattern was characterized by all the good stuff that you see here, soul food, banana pudding, peach cobbler, all of that. My mouth is watering, just speaking of it. And we knew that, in fact, that was part of the diet. So coming in and saying, you can no longer have these things was really cutting to the core of many of the cultures that we were working in. So we needed to kind of have that information and figure out how we can have healthier Southern traditional cooking so that some of the staples that they were used to could be there, but we could have a different slant to it so that it was not as unhealthy as it was there. And then also thinking about, in one of our other studies, we found that there were some protective foods that were actually in high use in terms of dietary intake among African Americans. And so we were able to take what they were already doing and promote that as another way to be protective around their weight management. And again, with the physical activity, we found that social support from family and friends for exercise and eating changes were limited in those communities. So when they took pictures and said, you know, yeah, I may make this for myself, or I may go out and do this exercise, but my spouse won't get into it, my family members won't do it. So we needed to kind of culturally tailor that to make sure there was a support group around individuals involved in our intervention so that they could feel supported. We also got information around, you know, body image and what that might look like. And some of you, might be familiar with some of the research that talks about, African Americans in particular, being, more accepting of larger body types. And so we needed to delve a little bit more deeper into that. So it's not that people are not able to recognize obesity, but the tolerance of where that level of overweight and obesity did differ among the population. And so what it was that we harped on, rather than sort of saying, hey, you need to get to a size 6 or a size 4 or a size whatever, we talked about what was different about the way you look right now and the way you want to look, and really leverage the dissatisfaction with where you are right now and where you want as a way that we promoted in the intervention. And then we also tried to work around the built environment barriers. So again, getting partnerships with schools that would allow our participants to be on after school hours, or the churches and so forth. So those were some of the ways that we used to adapt our intervention based on the needs of that community. So I think, in doing this work, there's some key ingredients. So obviously engaging your stakeholders, your community members and so forth, getting a better understanding of the lived experience, when needed, doing some adaptation that makes sure that it's really culturally relevant, and then having the ongoing evaluation, what's working, what's not working, and having the flexibility to make some adjustments as necessary. And then I would point here, sort of the last point of the objectives, my objectives for this talk, is to talk about, some of the challenges and opportunities. So there is always a balancing act here that I feel personally, and my colleagues that do this work. So on the left side here, you have the expert-driven research that most of us were trained, sort of, we're the investigator, particularly the PI, you know what you're doing, you're coming in, and you got all the answers, you know what needs to happen. This is, in terms of community involvement, very not, minimally involved, the community has no power. On the far right of that, it's totally community driven. It's, the community is the PI, they come up with the questions, they come up with everything, and there's a whole lot more involvement and more power, though academics will maybe have, on the other side of things, have less in power and involvement. And so really, I think the participatory research is that balance in between. So having some components of each part of that, and that's when you have the involvement and the equitable, the CBPR that I talked about. But it's not easy. So the ongoing challenges that I have found through my work in this area for almost 20 years is that it's really hard to do this work. I mentioned that we hire, to the extent possible, we hire people in the local community. And so being able to have a trained workforce that's committed to doing this work and is enthusiastic can sometimes be difficult, because we're at the distance. Many of my projects are actually in rural Alabama, rural Mississippi, where there may be as much as 4-hour driving distance between me and the staff, making sure that individuals are trained and supervise the accountability. So some of us, are a little bit better at that than others in terms of having your boss be so far away. There's also issues around human subjects protection and IRB. So all of our staff have to go through the IRB, and so I think they've gotten better over the years with having an IRB training that's more appropriate for community members. But we oftentimes have our staff that are really intimidated by that process, but they have to get online using their Blazer ID and the same things we have to do as well. It's really expensive to do this community engaged research, as you might imagine, having people in the local community being able to address the needs. And many times, your typical research projects, you're really busting at the seams in terms of your budgets to be able to pull this off. And then maintaining some kind of funding beyond that 3-year, 5-year grant to be able to maintain that commitment is oftentimes extremely difficult. Translating findings for community members. So again, we're really great at doing that for our peer reviewers and our journals, but making sure that the language we use and what we present is relevant is also sometimes can be a challenge sometimes. And then I think it's gotten much better, but publishing those community engaged findings in top tier journals historically has been a little bit of a challenge, but I think more and more as the funding mechanisms are recognizing community engaged research, then I think that some of the journals and the editors and the peer reviewers are understanding and recognizing this as a evidence-based methodology as well. So I'll leave on the opportunities. I think there are tremendous opportunities for community engaged research. It offers a critical dialogue between community members, researchers, policymakers, providers, and so forth. So I really think there's a tremendous opportunity there. I think specifically CBPR and other ethnographic methodologies like photo voice can lend itself to both, galvanizing and motivating the community itself to collect and use their own findings to advance efforts to eliminate inequities. I also think that, again, it started to come more of an age with more research funding, again, NIH in particular, and some of the work that I've done in cancer. I think UAB getting an NCI-funded community-based participatory research project funded 20 years ago. NCI was probably, one of the first institutes that really rolled out true CBPR funding, where they understood that you needed a significant part of time just to form your relationship. So for our cancer center, that meant 5 years of funding to just develop a network. And it was the second 5 years of funding where you started doing community-wide interventions. And it wasn't until the third 5 years of funding where we actually did a randomized clinical trial. But again, there's still a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Could you comment on where in the process you engage federal funding mechanisms? Because it seems like study sections aren't used to this, well, I mean, there must be study sections that are used to this kind of research, but that it's a different structure than what we normally think of when you actually are developing the project in a lot of ways with the participants that you need some money to get a relationship with.
Absolutely. So it is really a challenge. So when you engage in it, particularly in your federally funded research. So there are a couple of things. So one, there are some institutes now that have specific funding program announcements that are community-based participatory research based. So one of which the Shriver Institute, the NICHD in particular, had a series of funding mechanisms. So the first funding mechanism was just about you getting together. I think it was like a 2 to 3 year grant that was just about forming the project. And then they went to an R21 where you would pilot test what the intervention was that you developed. And then they had a mechanism, then you can go for the traditional R01 mechanism. So you could do it that way. Sometimes there have been CBPR projects that are all rolled in one as an R01. So sometimes they're 5, sometimes 7 years. But what I've really learned, you've got to be very creative. So some of the great opportunities, I think, at UAB for pilot funding, you might use some of that type of research to sort of form your network. Or what I often tell trainees is get connected with somebody who's already in the community that you want to work in. It is really difficult, particularly as junior folks, to develop that relationship because it takes so long and because you still do need to do the publications and the get the grant funding to connect with people that are already doing the work. So even for myself, when I got involved in this here at UAB, I connected with the Deep South Network for Cancer Control, which was already up and running in the Cancer Center. So I was a new investigator, so I still needed to do my own homework. They needed to see me as legitimate, but because there was still already a network, a community advisory board, I got an introduction from Dr. Partridge, who was the Cancer Center director. So they were willing to give me a little bit of space and time, but it does take some time. So I think, looking for specific mechanisms at NIH. PCORI is also another mechanism that understands and actually requires community engagement. So looking for those kind of flexible funds that are within the actual mechanisms, and then if not, trying to piece that together through either connecting with people who are already engaged or can get a quick startup, and then maybe writing into your larger grant, maybe some formative work where you can kind of go in after you know a little bit about the research questions because of your prior work, but you can go in and modify and adapt as necessary. So, I just have a couple of concluding thoughts and definitely will welcome any other comments or questions you have. So it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So be careful. For those of you who are interested in CBPR or community engaged research, it's not for everyone at all. But if you're doing it, you're in it for the long haul. It's not something that you'll be able to get out of very quickly. All participants, researchers and community members, again, I would say need to be co-learners. To the extent that you're learning something as an investigator and keeping that up keeps your excitement, it keeps you going and moving. And so it's a joint responsibility to make sure that each person is benefiting from that work. Mutual trust and respect, I think, are also really important to the success of those CBPR relationships. So one of my personal goals is to always be open and transparent. And even when things can't go the way I want them, to be very upfront with individuals about that. At the moment I know that I can't deliver on something I talked about, to be able to go back and sort of, talk about how we're going to be able to address that. Again, is not only important for the success of your particular program, but it's for the success for the next person that's going to come behind you. Being true to that model requires significant resources. So being aware of that and being able to leverage resources like, our CTSA here, really has a lot of resources that can help to facilitate those ongoing relationships. And I need to evaluate cost-benefit ratio for ongoing and future programs. So again, I mentioned that this community engagement may be helpful for scaling up, but there are very few studies out there that have really looked at the cost-benefit ratio. These interventions can be very costly to run and to develop the evidence base. But we need to dive a little bit deeper. So, here's a place where I think future research should go into looking and see, do we actually get the true bang for the buck for some of this work? Very quickly, here are a couple of things, resources. There's the web link there. It's on the slides and on your notes. Another area that I work in is here locally in Jefferson County, our Health Action Partnership. And we actually develop a resource guide. It's really aimed at health equity, but I think it's the same. It's using community engaged principles as well. And so, what we talk about here is, again, involving the people who are negatively impacted in the development, implementation, and evaluation of your programs. The second one is making sure that your objectives target those people in the communities that are negatively impacted by health disparities. So, if you see a disparity there, to the extent possible, go to the places where you see there are more problems as opposed to kind of spreading it out so that you can really have more impact on the disparity if you're targeting those communities that are most in need. Again, valuing both the community and the technical expertise is really important, as we talk about in CBPR. And then supporting and building community capacity to act. So not just building up and saying, as long as I'm here, I'll help you, but really making sure that the community is left with assets that they can use on their own. So we're not making this codependence kind of a situation, that you're really leaving that. And that's part of the reason why we train and hire people in the local community. We use a lot of manualized treatments that we can leave behind so that people can continue on. We educate them about the research process so that if other programs come up, they can be gainfully employed in that as well. Our fifth principle is about leveraging opportunities. So again, working with collaborators, seeing who else is maybe doing some work in this area, instead of trying to go in and develop your own program, have people, if there's a program here from the dental school and The optometry group is also trying to do something in the same community. Instead of trying to each go in and have their own thing, then how about getting together and seeing how you can have one process together that addresses those multiple needs. And then lastly, making sure that your communication messages are appropriate, again, the cultural tailoring, and they get widely disseminated. So with that, I thank you very much, and we'll take any questions. I think we still have a few minutes.
I have one question about the photo voice. I know you said sometimes you use the digital, excuse me. I know in the photo voice you said sometimes you use the digital cameras.
Yes.
Do you ever allow the participants to use their cell phones? Because I've also seen it done that way.
So we have not, just because we need to get them back, or we would need to have access to that. And in our rural communities, many, not all, but many of our participants may not have smartphones, or they may have limited cellular data plans and so forth. So we don't want to be a burden to them. So we have not, but yes, I have definitely seen people in other communities to use that. It's also something that we've tried to steer clear of in terms of IRB and privacy. We just decided not to go that route.
It seems like some of the, you touched on some of the outcomes of empowerment and also insight that's gained for a process like the photo process. How do you measure those outcomes, if you think those are relevant?
I absolutely think they're relevant. We have not done a really great job of actually evaluating them and measuring them at all. I mean, I will be perfectly honest with that. And so certainly if you know ways that you think we might be able to do that, I'd love to be able to add that in. But mostly because we have a network that we've been with people, we use maybe just more anecdotally, have people taking this and what have they done as a result and so forth, but we have not systematically evaluated. But I think it will be definitely an addition to the literature.
This is a slightly cynical question, but my impression is that the university likes the fact that most extramurally funded research really belongs to the university, and that they employ all the people who are doing the research so that they can regulate it in the right ways and everything. When you begin to bring in as real participants in the research, community members who don't necessarily have a relationship, a formal contractual relationship with the university, does that create special issues? Are there trainings that people have to take to be able to be participants? Do you have to have special training to be authorized to do this, or is it sort of
Are you jumping at the bit to answer that question?
I am.
Okay, well, go right ahead.
I'm with IRB. I think y'all can hear me, but we actually have a pretty good record, I think, of late of working with these community members. I was just talking outside about the hurdle we had early on when I first started, and I was working on some CBPR research, trying to convince my board that a hairdresser was a valid investigator, because they were so geared towards biomedical, and they just couldn't, they wanted her CV. She doesn't have a CV. That's not the point. It's not her educational background. It is her ability in the community to reach across boundaries and to make relationships and help recruit. And we've had CBPR research that involved homeless people as investigators. And so it's taken a while, but I think that our board has actually really began to understand that these are not going to be Dr. So-and-so at Johns Hopkins, that this is the way it has to be. So we have developed a community-based participatory short version training. So they don't have to take this big 4-hour training and learn how to send IDEs to the FDA. They can focus on the information that they need to develop. And so I think we're building that bridge pretty well. That's why I'm back.
Yes, and I would echo. So certainly over the 16 years that I've been here, it's been a whole lot easier to kind of have those kinds of proposals go through, and I have done tons. So definitely I think so. The other piece about whose data is it that I try, and actually also has gotten a lot easier over the years here, is to the extent possible if we have community partners, so partnering organizations, I actually will do a subcontract. So I will try to be more equitable in terms of the finances. And so we have a scope of work for that group. They get the money to do that work. And therefore they have more ownership around how that work happens, with obviously the oversight of UAB, making sure that we're following all the federal guidelines. So that has been a lot easier. It was challenging early on because a lot of the community-based organizations are not the Hopkins or the UAB, so they don't have the money up front. So typically in federal, grants, you spend the money, you get reimbursed, so they don't have the money up front. And so we've been able to, through wonderful conversations with our administration, helping them to understand and educating them about what we do, to be able to do some other kinds of ways that the monies can be more quickly disseminated out to those partners. So it certainly has gotten better. And what we try to, because they are investigators, it's our data. And that's the other benefit of having people to be UAB employees and having gone through the IRB process. And to the extent possible, that's why we have them help with our dissemination products as well. So we do give that information and leave it behind.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, we'll take a couple of minute break. Just before everybody breaks, so I'm embarrassed that I'm here to tell you that, again, we're not ready to launch the Kaizen. And I'm not going to make any promises except when it's going to come, because I haven't been able to come through on it, but I certainly hope within the next week or two. So anyway, nobody's missed anything yet, and we'll make sure that when stuff goes out that everybody gets a separate email so you know that it's what's coming. Okay, it'll take 5 minutes. Thanks. Okay, thanks so much. That's very question. Actually, it was real good.
I mean, it's much more easy, but as more people do it, yeah. Okay.
So I'm excited that I just submitted a pilot grant for support us.
Okay. The community. Okay.
Actually,
Yeah. I mean,
Okay. I just wanted to offer you. Okay. So I chose updates on that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Accessibility.
So do you know Letitia?
Yes.
Okay.
We did a board first thing on that. I just kind of what needs to happen.
Okay.
So,
keep you on the end of the now.
yes.
So, and probably Mike Montevero and what I'll say that I mean, they definitely, and Jeannie, the Marazzo, some of these things, so that's great. Well, you know where I am.
But I just called her this morning and moving. Okay. Yeah, 7 hours. When we change times, it'll be 6. But yeah, 7 hours. We definitely asked him to do off hours. Yes. They're used to that.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'll get some. Thanks.
Okay, let me look in that and maybe send them just a reminder.
So there are some issues about
Do you do community-based research? The sauce of you, seem like you want to change tonight.
Yeah, I'm research.
Okay, let's regather. We'll get started.
Some important things that I think we're all kind of.
We have this pointer if you actually want to point at anything, but it's sort of makes the screen go dark. Gives you this little, I find it pretty awkward, but if you want to try it, it allows people at home or allows people to see things. So this next section is to give you an introduction to our local IRB and what the general IRB process. You've heard a little bit already about some of the kind of research fiascos that have led to the need for IRBs, but Carrie Oliver is the Assistant Director of the local IRB. She's been a terrific partner for the CCTS. She helps us organize, I hope it's still going to work this year, that people can come and sit in on an IRB session. So after today, we'll ask you to be bringing your calendars with you at next meeting so that we can sign you up. 2 at a time, we'll go to witness an IRB session. It'll run from around 9 to noon on the day that you go. It's on a Wednesday, so you'll just leave here early the day that you're assigned. And it gives you a real chance to see how IRBs work and so you'll know how to handle your own applications a little more effectively. I'll get out of the way.
Okay.
So I know we ran out of water. I'll bring in a few bottles and just hold them up, and if you can come and just get them from you.
Hi, everyone. I'm here to talk about the IRB, not the most scintillating topic this early in the morning, but I'll try to be quick and to the point and ask questions anytime you want. So I'm just going to head off because I lost about 20 minutes, so I'm going to go fast. We're law. So the IRB is a law. We are in the Code of Federal Regulations, who we are, what we do, what our mandate is. So we have to exist, and we are supposed to be independent of administrations from where we are. So, and we are here at UAB, which is a great thing. The purpose is to protect human subjects in research. It's as simple as that. We do a lot of other things that are given to us as mandates by administration or where the likely gatekeeper should be, but the boil it down version is we are protecting human subjects in research. And this is a human-derived process and very subjective, even though there are very prescribed regulations. So here's the basics. Risks to subjects are minimized, reasonable risk-benefit ratio, selection of subjects is equitable, which just means that we are not just choosing one population. We want to make sure that, for instance, in the biomedical field, a lot of research is not done in pregnant women or minors because of the risk involved. And so what we find is that when you have a child who has to get a drug, they're spitballing because we don't have the research there. We find that here at UAB, we have a large, or here in Birmingham, we're a very large Hispanic community, and yet the burden of translating documents is sometimes too much, and people just say English speaking. That's our criteria, you have to speak English. And it excludes a whole population of people, a large population of people in Birmingham. So that's a really important aspect of human subjects protections, is to provide opportunities for research for everyone. And then the informed consent process, obviously. So those are the big ones. All right, so here are our regulatory bodies. OHRP is our big one. You'll hear us talk about that's the Office of Human Research Protections. But also the FDA, HIPAA, FERPA, which is kind of the HIPAA of for educational records. So student records, grades, test scores, work product. Protection of People Rights Amendment, which protects people from going in and asking highly sensitive surveys of minors in schools without parental permission. And then a whole bunch of others, DOD, DOJ, DOE, the Department of Energy, they all have their own little peccadillos. NIDA has their own, certain NIH departments have their own little things, so we have to know all of them, which is a lot of fun. And they're not always concordant, which is even more fun. So it's hard to determine who wins sometimes when even something as simple as what the definition of a human subject is varies from agency to agency. So here's something I think is very important to know, and I think this is probably one of my favorite aspects of the IRB is the thought that went into this. So this is regulatorily driven. That an IRB must have at least 5 members so that there is some kind of diversity of thought. One of them has to be a scientist, but one has to be a non-scientist. And we have to have someone who is what we call a community member. Sometimes that is a double up with a scientist, but sometimes it's even a different member, especially if you're a hospital or a university that's in a specific area where that community needs to be represented on the board. For instance, we live in the South. So in the South, we want to make sure that and this is just our population, so we have clergy. We have clergy members who serve on our board to represent a predominantly religious community in the South. We want to make sure that voice is heard. So we have a rabbi, we have a Baptist minister, and so we make sure that voice is heard on our board. We also have, we do prisoner research, and so we have to have a prisoner advocate, someone who's worked with that community before who can be that voice. Prisoners are singly the most vulnerable population you could possibly think of. And so we need to have someone who represents them when the research is come to us. But then also we're allowed to bring in consultants. So if there's something new that we haven't really seen before, which happens a lot biomedically, but even happens a lot in translational science. You just had a CBPR, and when we first started amping up our CBPR, that was something that we needed to kind of get schooled on. So we brought people in for that. I just think that's fascinating to me. We have way more than 5 people. And you guys heard about the Belmont Report, as I understand. So I just want to go over, these are our pillars. This is respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And I always think the Belmont Report is a lot like the Constitution. You know, we have one of the most elegant constitutions in the world. It's short and sweet and to the point. And I really think this is a very elegant document. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you do it. It's well written. It's kind of an interesting read. And the history behind it is really fascinating. But those are our pillars, and we kind of, everything we do goes off them. They're relevant today. They've never gone out of fashion. So the Belmont, you know, those are the principles. And then we have the regulations. And then the IRB is where the decisions get made. And then the investigators, that's where the rubber hits the road. So that's where it all gets enacted. All these other things are to kind of help you guys be the best you can so that when you're down in the trenches, when nothing goes right or when something goes wrong, then you have that kind of foundation to know what to do. All right, so the IRB can approve things. We can require modifications, disapprove, but mostly it's going to be that require modifications. I've been here 10 years this year. And I think we've disapproved, in my knowledge, I think 2 projects. One where a dentist wanted to take healthy molars out of someone, and we said no, they might need them. And one was disapproved, but the guy went back to the drawing board and he kind of came back. And it was just a high risk, and he hadn't quite seen where the risk was. I think that's it. Most of the time, we just ask for, some swerving and maybe try it this way or something like that. So disapproval is actually fairly rare. Review. Oh, we just disapproved a recent one. So that's 3. I forgot about that one. And that was actually disapproved for the researcher's health and safety because she was going to be doing something that we felt would get her in a lot of trouble and have the police call on her and things like that. It was scary. So that's why it was disapproved in that case. So those are the things we're allowed to do. Audit and suspension and termination we don't take lightly, but we've done it. There are bad eggs in the researcher group, and you just, I think Sheila Moore gave the talk about the history, and you can see that it's ongoing. There's still bad eggs. They're still out there. So sometimes suspension and termination is what we do. All right, so risk to subjects are minimized. We just talked about that. Selection is equitable, informed consent. Talking about data monitoring, privacy and confidentiality. These are our main, the main focus of what we do. Unfortunately, we can't find out that information unless you tell us a whole lot of other information. We can't just go with, trust me, I'm keeping the data confidential. So we kind of have to know, we have to actually see how, and we make the determination that it is in fact confidential. So that's hard. I'm going to go over a few definitions because I think they're really important for you guys to understand, because these are regulatory definitions. So sometimes we say things like, and I've learned never to say this, but this is how I learned it, but I say, oh, I'm sorry, what you're describing to me isn't research. And yes, it is. It's like, no, it doesn't meet the regulatory definition of research. So now I make sure I say that, because there's research with the lowercase r, and for us, there's a research with capital R. This is a definition. This is a regulatory definition, a systematic investigation, including research, development, testing, and evaluation, designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. A systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. Both of those things have to be true in order for it to meet the regulatory definition of research. So it has to be systematic in nature, and it has to be designed to create new knowledge or to contribute to existing knowledge, filling a knowledge void. And that can be and a generalizable knowledge void. So that's the definition of research. So things that aren't research, scholarly activities, oral history, they may be filling a knowledge void, but they're generally not generalizable. Public health and surveillance activities, they aren't designed to be generalizable. They're designed to solve a health crisis or a health problem. Collection and analysis of biospecimens for criminal justice agencies or court ordered, again, not designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. Homeland Security, again, the same thing. This is the very first question we ask. We don't leap to, is it human subjects? We don't leap to, but I'm interviewing minors. Interviewing minors is not the definition of research. And a lot of people take that hop, skip, and a jump. Well, I'm looking at patient data, so it must be research. Nowhere in the definition of research does it say, and obtaining HIPAA data. It's just a systematic investigation designed to develop to generalizable knowledge. So, case reports of 3 or less, they're not systematic in nature. They don't meet the regulatory definition of research. Quality improvement activities that are solely done to solve a problem at your hospital, unit, school, whatever, are not research. They may have if you have another reason for doing them, they may meet the definition of research. But if they're solely, hey, we have this problem, here's a solution, let's collect some data to make sure it worked, we're talking quality improvement there. That is not designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. So that definition is critical. You can see how many things that look, feel, taste, and smell like research may not actually be research in the regulatory definition realm. But once we've established it's research, we're going to ask, well, is it human subjects research? Because it may be research, but now does it meet the definition of human subject? The human subject has a few more prongs to it. The first one being a living individual about whom you interact or intervene or obtain biospecimens or data that are identifiable. So that's the thing, identifiable. So if I'm using publicly available data, it may be systematic in nature and it may contribute to generalizable knowledge, but I'm not collecting identifiable data. So it doesn't meet the definition of human subject. So it may be research, but it's not human subjects research. Or I may be collecting data about dead people, homicide rates, suicide rates. They are no longer with us. I'm doing research on whole brains. I'm getting whole brains from pathology. We're going to assume they're not alive. So they're not living, not human subjects research. So those two definitions are really important to know. Even if you don't remember them, know they exist because they are the nuance of when an IRB kicks in. And you need to know what your local policies and procedures are because for us, we're the ones who make these decisions for UAB. So this is our second question. Is it first? Is it human subjects? And I mean, is it research? And then if it is, then is it human subjects? So what's an intervention? Interact or intervene. So an intervention is, and this is a regulatory definition too, it's a physical procedure by which data is captured or it's a manipulation of the environment. So if I want to collect data on how annoyed you are, if I flick these lights on, I'm manipulating your environment. If I want to deliver this lecture and give you a pre-test and post-test, I have delivered an intervention. So that's an intervention. An interaction is a contact. We are having an interaction. When I call you on the phone, we're having an interaction. If I inject something into you, we're having an interaction. If I send you an email with a link to an online survey and never see your face, we still had an interaction. I still sent you an email. We interacted. If I am standing off to the side and watching what you do from afar in a public park, we are not having an interaction. What? All right. So private information is also important. That's why I said public park. Private information is something where you have a reasonable expectation that it will be private. And that's really the best definition we can get. There is not a list of what is and isn't private because that's a moving target. If you think about online forums or chat rooms or even your Facebook page, the concept of what is private could vary from person to person. And it varies in our field from university to university. So we have to look at these things one-on-one. Private is a tough thing in this day and age where we put so much of ourselves in the public eye and yet freak out when we find out Google used it and sold it to someone. It's the same, same stuff. So it's an interesting concept that is not very easily defined. So identifiable private information is it private information and can I readily ascertain who you are. And readily ascertain is also not defined. Yay, team. So that's really hard to figure out sometimes too. And we have to look at it on a case-by-case study. I had a nursing student who wanted to interview other nurses in her clinic. And when she sent me the demographic form, she had a breakdown that was unusual for me, enough to ask a question. She had a breakdown demographically of, white, African-American, Asian, Pacific Islander. Like, I haven't seen that often. I just casually asked, and she said, well, there's this one guy, he's from Tonga. So she included it so we would have a box to check, but then she also completely identified him. He's the guy from Tonga. So, it's like, okay, well, we're not, we're no longer anonymous. So it is often a case-by-case situation where we have to look at it and see. Yeah.
What do you do in this situation? Does the person change it to like other or something?
Yes. Yeah. Or in some cases, we say, a lot of people, like, of course, anonymous is the best. The less data you can have about someone, the best. But sometimes people struggle so hard for anonymity, and it's not necessary. We have confidentiality measures in place to collect identifiable data. Sometimes you just have to collect identifiable data. And people get so wigged out about it. It's like, no, I'm going to do all these Herculean efforts. And I just kind of want to go, or you just could ask their name. And then just keep it on a nice, secure, server, and don't give it to anybody, and be careful with it. So there's sometimes and it's great. It's actually a good instinct, but sometimes I have to dial people back and say, well, sometimes you just need the date of birth. So let's just get that and let's move on and not worry about it. So I think in that case, I told her that she needed to go ahead and, she wants to know Pacific Islander, she can identify the guy. Just don't call it anonymous. All right, so we have 4 levels of review here at UAB. So the not human subjects research, that's when a project doesn't meet the regulatory definition of research, or if it does, not human subjects research. Then we have exemptions, then we have expedited, and then we have full and convened. So those are the 4 levels. You may not see that at every single, you may not see that kind of granularity, because some smaller shops kind of throw everything to the board, and because they don't have the staff to do individual. So non-human subjects research, we just talked about that. There's a special application just for that. It's really simple and straightforward. You probably don't need a whole lot else if you're doing that. So if you're using an online data set that you can prove to us is completely stripped of identifiers, and there's a ton of them. ICPSR has a jillion of them, and they're all stripped, and they all qualify for not human subjects research. You just have to tell us enough information that we can confirm that. Just to understand, it is not human subjects research. It's not non-human subjects research. It's not that it's non-human, because that's a whole other science. It is not human subjects research. And we're the ones that kind of make that decision. It's a designation. It's not an approval. We're just saying we agree with you. That doesn't meet the definition. And this is just a lovely graphic, not mine, and it's all over the place, so I don't even have a credit for it. But we asked that first question: is it research? No. Okay, bye. Thank you. Come again. All right. Yes, it is. Well, is it human subjects research? No. Okay, bye. Thank you. Shop with us soon. And then if it is, then we move into the actual review process. That's just, that's just what we have to do every single time. And we will get full board protocols that are actually not research. So we have to do this every time. We have to read it and go, is it research? Yep. Okay, is it human subjects? All right, so quality improvement program evaluations, case reports of 3 or less. We talked about that. That's not research, not human subjects, cadaveric material or data, coded or de-identified specimens. These are the types of things that qualify there. Exempt has changed. So I don't know if you guys have heard about the revised common rule. The common rule is what we call our regulatory body. It had not changed since the early 90s. And we had radical changes that went into effect a week ago Monday. And so our lives have been sheer and utter hell for the last 4 or 5 months as we tried to interpret them, rewrite every policy and procedure. Some of the definitions that I've already given to you were part of the revision, so that definition of human subject actually changed from what it was previously. And the major changes were in what was considered to be exempt. They broadened a lot of categories. So a lot of things that were previously reviewed at a higher level are now being reviewed under the exemption review. I'm not going to go through them as changes. I'm going to go through them as fact. There's no need for me to tell you what was versus now, so this is just the way it is. Exempt, though, it's not a verb. It is not a get out of jail free card. It is not something when you say, woohoo, I'm exempt from IRB, so I don't have to apply to the IRB. They are actually a carve out within the federal regulations that says if you do this kinds of research, you are exempt from the rest of these regulations. But you still have to comply to those regulations, so there is an exemption review application that you have to complete. And you have to go through and tell us how it fits one of the categories. So remember that. People will commingle something that is not research or exempt. They think not research means it's exempt. Remember, there are 4 different review types: not research, not human subjects research, exempt, expedited, and full. That's going to happen everywhere. So exempt and not human subjects research are not synonyms. So here are the 6 categories. I'm not going to go in depth on them. There's a general category for educational research. It's pretty broad. Minors can be involved. You can do a lot in there. There are just a couple of caveats. It has to be in a normal educational setting. It has to involve normal educational practices. And the research can't infringe on a student's ability to learn or an educator's ability to be promoted or grow. Yes?
Does that include education in terms of medical education? So for example, diabetics.
It's actually very broad. It could be done in the back of a Michael's if you want to learn about crafting. It could be done at driver's ed, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, workplace training. So it's not K through 12. It's not DOE. It is a normal educational setting. Anywhere that education typically occurs and involving normal educational practices as they pertain to that normal educational setting. If you are learning how to skydive, then there are going to be some very specific, although normal, educational practices for skydiving. So that's how that is interpreted. It's very broad, very broad. Surveys, interviews, focus groups, and observation research, that is not very broad. That has to only be that. It cannot involve any intervention. If I wanted to give this lecture and give you a survey before and after, it would not fit that because I've given you an intervention. I can only give you a survey, an interview, do a focus group. I can ask you to manipulate something. I can pass my glasses around and you can give me your opinion about them. But I can't wear glasses and give you my research and then have someone, or my lecture, and have someone come in without glasses and give you the lecture and see how wearing glasses affects you. That's an intervention. That's a subtlety, but that's an intervention. However, they've added a new exempt category called benign behavioral interventions. So both of the things that I just described would probably fall in there at that point. A benign behavioral intervention, and we talked about what an intervention is. A benign one is obviously one that's not harmful, it's not painful, it's not exhausting, it won't cause embarrassment. Interestingly, the way the regs now read for this is it won't cause embarrassment or won't offend based on what the investigator's best opinion on that is. Because, let's be honest, if I wanted to give a lecture to 15 times, and I'll be honest, within the next 15 minutes, you're going to hear the word gonorrhea out of my mouth. That could be offensive to someone. So how am I going to know? So I have to put my best interest, my best. I don't think most people will be offended by this. There might be one, but I think most people will be okay. So that is part of what benign means. It's got to be short in duration. We just define that as 5 hours or less. And it has to be behavioral in nature, no medical. And then we have research on identifiable data. This used to be research on pre-existing data, but now it's pretty much open. So any kind of medical record review, any kind of data review that does involve identifiable private information can go here. So, and then public benefit, which we've never had here and probably never will. It's very rare, and it has to be something that is supported by a federal agency and posted on the website, and we've never had that. And then taste and food quality, we've also never had because we don't really have a school of agriculture, but schools like Auburn or Mississippi State that do, they have these out the wazoo, but we just never see it. So that's the exemptions. We have our website. So this is just to kind of let you guys know what's some resources available to you. Okay, and that was all right. So I was gonna point, and I'm not gonna mess with it. So that is our guidebook. It's under guidance up there. And it's got chapters down the side that tell you, if you want to know about expedited reviews or general information or consenting or whatever, you can go there. And then once you get into the exemption, you can look at each category and it'll tell you a little bit more about it. This is just a very good resource. It's highly searchable. I highly recommend you use it if you have questions because it's a lot more lay language than our policies and procedures. So expedited is this has 7 categories. Expedited, by the way, isn't any faster. Exempt doesn't mean it's exempt, and non-human subjects means it may even be humans. So they have lovely words for all of these things that don't always mean what you think they mean. Expedited just means what type of review they have to have by an individual versus a board. But all the same review process is the same. So this is no more than minimal risk, and these are our categories, except I see a typo. Clinical drugs and medical devices when an IND or an IDE is not required, so this is already FDA-approved devices or drugs. Number 2 is a blood collection study, so if you're just collecting blood and analyzing it. Collection of biological specimens through non-invasive procedures. We're talking tear collection, skin scraping, saliva, those types of biological specimens. Collection of data through non-invasive procedures. Step on the scale, let them get your blood pressure, that kind of thing. 5 is just collection of data. So I'm going into your medical record, I'm going to be getting data. Now this is probably just going to be part of another study, another category, since so much of that will now be exempt.
So how is number 5 there different from the
exemption one?
Yeah.
So that was the big question when they came out. They didn't change these. So the only thing that we really can think of is that 5 would be part of another study. If you were doing blood collection and getting medical data. So 7 is the same. So 6 is collection of data from voice, video, digital, or imaging. That's hardly ever a standalone either. It's normally part of something else. If you're going to record the voice, you're probably doing a survey or an interview. If you are doing an image, you may be doing an MRI you're probably collecting other data. So it tends to be not a standalone. 7, we had the same question. Now that we have this category 2 so robust the way it is, what's left in 7? 7 is basically if you're doing a survey in minors, so there are this 5 and 7. We're not sure we're going to see a lot of them. We're probably going to see them as part of larger studies that involve blood collection or biological specimens or things like that. But we'll see how it all shakes out. Good question, because no one's answered that for us yet either. All right, so full board. These are protocols that are greater than minimal risk, and they go to the full board, and that's where you guys are going to go. It's fascinating. I ask that you not use your cell phones while you're in there. It's tough, I know. If you're on call, we understand if you have to leave early, we get that. Just let somebody know when you get there. Be prepared. Our board chair is Ferdinand Artaler, and he is in cardiology at Kirkland, and he's in Switzerland. And if you are from anywhere but the United States, he will want to talk to you about that because he loves all things international. But he will ask you where you're from, what you're doing here, what you do here. He just wants to know what your role is. You don't get to interject or interrupt or anything like that, unfortunately, even if you may want to. You may have like very pertinent information, but you'll need to keep quiet. But it's fascinating. You will hear real live ethical discussions going on and see some of the things that we grapple with. It's fascinating. I hope you guys get good meetings. All right, so we talked about that. So real quick, and I know I'm probably running late, but I want to kind of talk to you about how to think like us. It's really important that you understand that, because a lot of times what we get in applications is cut and paste from grant applications. Well, grant applications are kind of peer reviewed and things like that. We don't have your disciplines. We don't have your background. We don't have your education. We don't know all your acronyms. We don't know your jargon. And so this is the place where you really keep it simple. Remember, we're human subjects protections. We want to know what's happening to them. And so when we get, I'm going to do a mixed method study using purposeful sampling, using hierarchical responses to stimuli in a novel setting, and this is real. This is what we got. And I know what this means. I've gone to school. I know what that means. But actually in the world of IRB, that means nothing. That's told us nothing. There are a lot of 2-bit words in there. There are some real 25-cent, 50-cent words in there. They're lovely. And I'm sure they impress someone along the way. But they are useless to us. Copying and pasting is going to be your demise. It's just not the same application. We aren't asking the same questions, and we're not asking them for the same reasons. We need to know the down and dirty, the simple. We want to know that mixed method study is, well, this part I'm going to bring some people in, and I'm going to give them a series of choices on words we want to use for the name of this flyer. And they're going to rank them. They're going to put them in order and tell us which ones they like best. And I'm going to recruit people who have the disease that the flyer is about, and here's how I'm going to recruit them. I know what that means. It just doesn't tell us what we need to know. So we don't understand this. So we want to know what you're doing. Who are they specifically? I don't want to know their UAB patients. That's not telling me who they are. Are there people from the Tuesday Sickle Cell Clinic? That I get. I want to know that. How are you recruiting them? What's happening to them? What is their experience? If you don't know these things, you're not ready to apply to the IRB. If you can't walk me through each one of these processes, you haven't thought it through enough yet to apply. And you certainly haven't thought it through enough to get an approval to start your research. What are the potential risks? What data are you collecting specifically? Medical data is not enough. I'm going to collect demographics, not enough. That's not enough information. What are you collecting? Give me a data collection sheet. You should have one. If you're going to systematically collect data, you should have some systematic way to collect that data. You should know the variables you're already going to collect. Are they being consented? And if so, how? If you called them, would it seem like a cold call? Would they be a little freaked out about that? Hi, this is Carrie Oliver. I'm calling from UAB. I heard you had gonorrhea last semester, and I was just wondering if you'd like to do a survey about that. See, I told you I was going to use the word gonorrhea. Wouldn't you be a little upset? Who are you? How do you know that? Who gave you that information? The only person I thought knew about it was my doctor. We don't want that. So we need to know exactly how you plan to recruit. How will they be there for 8 hours? Will they have to pay for parking? Those are things participants care about. They care about parking and payment more than you could ever imagine. And we need to know. Do you have enough statistical power so you can do the research? Are you asking them to go through all of this knowing you're not going to be able to answer any of your research questions? Are you asking embarrassing questions in a waiting room? This is for real. This is a woman proposed to go over to Kirkland Clinic, this open plan waiting room situation. And she literally stood up. She wanted to stand up and say, I am doing research on STDs. I'll be over here if anybody's interested in participating. It's like, God, no one's gonna stand. No one's coming. It's never gonna happen. But I mean, to her, that was like the short line to it. She hadn't thought it through. I had another person who wanted to go into elementary schools, and her research was, why overweight children disengage from physical education, PE activities. So she wanted to interview them. So she wanted to go in, get all the fat kids, pull them over here, and do an interview. And I said, no, you're going to have to interview all of them. You have to interview all the children. She didn't want. She said, but I don't want all those. I said, I don't care. You cannot go and take all the overweight kids and stick them off into a corner while the skinny kids run around and play dodgeball. They've got to, they're going to figure out the common thread, and that's not cool. But there wasn't a think through on that process. She was going to what is the most direct way to get my data, and not the most protective way to get her data. So she had to interview all the kids. They have to pay for lose time from work. What would happen if their boss knew what they said, or their rabbi, or whatever? What data are you going to have in your hands, even for a hot minute? A lot of people answer those questions in the application about what data they need to analyze their research purpose. That is often the process of getting the data you need to analyze a research purpose. The process generally involves collecting data you don't need. You normally can't get that data unless you know a name, a date of birth, something first. So what data will you have in your hands for just a minute? Because breaches don't wait for you to de-identify. You're going through the airport, the guy who steals your laptop from the end of the security area didn't stop first and ask you, before I take this, have you stripped all the names off of your data? The guy who steals your car doesn't call you up first. So that's why we need to know, what are you going to have in your hands anytime that could be breached? We need to know. What's the worst that could happen? All right, so know your research plan, guys. Write it out. those kinds of details that I'm talking about, I really want you to go through. What's the first thing, next thing? Who, what, when, where, why, how? Like a journalism article. You may not need all of it, but if you haven't thought it through, you're probably not ready. You're probably going to end up with a lot of deviations and surprises. Really think it through, keep it simple, lay language. All right, here's my test case. So Hazel Jones, she's a med student. She wants to determine whether patients with type 2 diabetes who drink Diet Coke do better than those who drink water. It's just, I'm making this up. It's not a real thing. 100 patients with type 2 diabetes. She wants to randomly assign 50 to just drink Diet Coke and 50 to drink water. And then she's going to take an A1C blood test afterward. That's her general idea. So she's filled out. We ask, how will you find prospective participants? And she writes, the PI will ask the participants if they would like to participate. Anybody got an idea what's wrong so far?
How does she know which patients are type 2 diabetics?
Okay, so, pardon?
Would you repeat for the online people?
How the PI will ask participants if they would like to participate. So what I asked what was wrong, she said, how do we know they're type 2 diabetics? So that is, how will you find prospective participants? We're assuming.
Where are the patients?
Where are they? That's all going to be in, first I've got to find type 2 diabetics. I'm assuming they're going to be at my UAB clinic because I'm doing diabetes research. I'm probably not going to go out to the mall and just go, are you diabetic? Are you diabetic? So I've got a pool. I'm going to look into my medical records in my office. That's HIPAA cool. All right, what else is wrong? I'm going to ask them to participate.
Did the doctor or anybody on the staff in the clinic ask permission for that investigator to come in the room? Because if you go in and ask for permission, they may not want anybody to know they were in the clinic.
That's true. So if there was face-to-face recruitment as opposed to I'm going to go and, you know, find these people this way. If I just did it in the clinic, I want to make sure that it's okay for me to march into someone's clinic's appointment. They may be in a hurry. They may not want me there. So first of all, it's what does this mean? I mean, what it's saying, and I'm skipping to the bottom, is the PI will ask patients if they would like to participate. That answer says, I will recruit patients by recruiting patients. That has told us nothing. It seems like it's an answer. It feels like an answer, but it actually isn't. It is a non-answer. What patients? Where are they? Are they your patients? Can you visualize this process? I'm going to go into the medical records. I'm going to look them up. So let's take it in there. How will you find prospective participants? All right, so the PI will review medical records for participants who meet the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and they will call them to see if they're interested in participating in the project. This sounds a little better, right? Got some more meat in here. What's wrong here? Yes.
They're not telling them exactly what it is they have to do.
That's true. That may not be something that would be in this section, but that is something that you would have to think of, is what are you going to say to them when you invite them to it? How much are you going to tell them?
Cold call.
It could be a cold call. Are they your patients? Are you allowed to do that? This could be a cold call. You have to be careful. We're not saying that you can't invite his patients to research. What we're saying is there needs to be some sort of handshake visible. When you call them, you would say, hi, my name is Carrie Oliver. I'm a colleague of Dr. So-and-so who is your oncologist. And he indicated to me that you might be interested in this research. We've now made the handshake. We've now kind of explained how I did this. Now I know you have gonorrhea, and now I know you have gonorrhea. We would never let you make that phone call, by the way. But you know, so we have to make that handshake. So again, we needed a little more information so that we understand. You're calling them up. What are you going to say? So here we go. Participants will come from Dr. Marty Davis's Tuesday Type 2 Diabetes Clinic and see a letter of support from Dr. Davis. Dr. Davis has said that's cool. The PI will approach the participants in their exam room, explain his relationship to Dr. Davis, present them with a summary of the project, which is what you were saying, and then ask if they'd like to join the study. So we've gone from, I will recruit by participants by asking them to participate, to meat and potatoes. This is the detail we need. There are very few multisyllabic words in here. There's hardly any jargon, or there's one acronym, T2, all right? How will consent be conducted? Patients will be provided a consent after agreeing to participate in the research study. And that's very true. It's a very true statement. That is generally how consent does. You want to be in it? Cool. Here's a consent form. But what's wrong here?
Are they given a paper to read themselves? Or are you going to read it to them?
Are they given something to read themselves? Are you going to read it to them? And that is a really important question that is often discussed heavily in board meetings. What kind of research can you go, here, read this, and then go, versus what kind of research requires a consent discussion? That's a really good point, and not on my list here.
It sounds like an intervention requires more stuff.
Interventions can, it just depends on the intervention. If I were doing the intervention that I keep referring to here, where I'm giving you a pre-test, I'm giving this lecture, and I do a post-test, my explanation of procedure section of my consent form is going to be about 4 sentences. It's not going to be very complex. Hey, I'm going to give a lecture. I'm going to ask you to do a pre-test and post-test. It's going to take about 5 minutes. I think that's 2 sentences. I don't think I need to have a big consent discussion with you. You can either fill out the test or not. Hey, I'm going to give a pre-test. I'm going to give a lecture. Then I'm going to take a quart of blood, and then I'm going to give a post-test. Might require a little more conversation. So it goes back and forth on that. So here, so who will do that? Who's doing the consent? Is it their direct physician who might have a little bit of coercion involved? Is it their principal or teacher? You know, so who's doing it? When is it occurring according to events? Is it occurring right on the heels of the intervention, which it can, but should it? So are they going to have a 24-hour waiting period? And they don't necessarily need to. There's lots of reasons why. And who will conduct that? So we need to know a lot of information about that. At the time of recruitment, after participants have expressed interest in the project, participants will be provided a copy of the consent form to take home with them. Then we'll call them 2 days later to schedule their baseline visit. And at that visit, prior to doing anything to them, we will conduct a consent discussion and obtain consent. That tells us all we need to know. All right, I know, do we have to bail? So I'm just gonna see if there's anything. Oh, there was consent, but we need to go. But are there any questions so far or for this? And I'll leave this. You have these consent slides. Cool beans. Thank you, guys.